During your Senate confirmation hearings, you repeatedly denied having any involvement as a private citizen in the firing of FBI officials who engaged in the prosecution against January 6 insurrectionists, the violent rioters who beat and killed Capitol police officers, and whom you referred to as political prisoners. Since then, multiple whistleblowers have come forward, and we know that you likely committed perjury. At the same hearing, you claimed you were not familiar with Stu Peters, an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier, despite the fact that you appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 separate times. 8 times, and you claimed not to recall. Mr. Patel, my second question is, should we worry more about your memory or your veracity?
We should worry more about your lack of candor. You're accusing me of committing perjury. Tell the American people how I broke the law and committed a felony. Have the audacity to actually put the facts forward instead of lying for political banter so you can have a 20-second donation hit.
The answer is both. I believe that
the answer is you're failing, not me.
I reclaim my time.
Go ahead.
In a heated clash between political accountability and institutional defense, Representative Madeleine Dean delivered a sharp and forceful criticism of FBI Director Kash Patel, turning what should have been a standard House budget hearing into a serious judgment on the Bureau's integrity. Citing deep concerns about the agency's leadership and financial priorities, the Pennsylvania Democrat accused Patel of using federal law enforcement as a tool for political payback. She warned that such conduct could carry dangerous consequences for American democracy. The confrontation reached its breaking point when Dean openly accused Patel of likely giving false testimony during an earlier appearance, setting off a tense and uncompromising exchange that exposed the growing divide between the administration's leading law enforcement figure and the congressional officials assigned to hold him accountable.
And thank you, Mr. Patel, for your testimony and for being here today. I've been looking at the President's 120-word FBI budget request, the so-called skinny, I'll call it Ozempic request, that states that, quote, the undoing of the weaponization of the FBI is one of the administration's top priorities. The weaponization of the FBI that is something that deeply concerns me. It should concern all of us. And yet, since taking office, President Trump has been on a revenge tour. He has targeted individuals, universities, law firms, with executive orders to cut them out or to make them come under his will. He has used ICE to disappear U.S. citizens without due process, and he's fully ignored a unanimous Supreme Court order, and then over the weekend wasn't sure if he was obligated to uphold the Constitution of the United States. In your book, your recent book, Government Gangsters, you include an appendix with a list of names that people have referred to as an enemies list. Now, I know you will claim it's just an appendix, not an enemies list. So let's focus on how the president sees it, on what the president calls it. And you proudly display his quote on the front cover of your book. The president calls this a brilliant roadmap, a blueprint. And I have not even raised your storied children's book, The Plot Against the King. It concerns me how many people from this blueprint have been targeted with executive orders and FBI investigations. The FBI cannot be weaponized, and under your leadership, it has been nothing but a weapon alongside the president to go after the president's perceived opponents, to stifle dissent and free speech. A few weeks ago, as we saw through a social media post that you quickly deleted, the FBI arrested a judge in Wisconsin for correctly asking ICE officials if they had a judicial warrant instead of an administrative warrant, which they did not have. Despite this judge following the law, on the morning of April the 25th, the FBI arrested the judge in an escalation of the weaponization of the FBI under your leadership. Let me be clear. A functioning democracy does not lock up judges. I am gravely concerned about the utter lack of independence of the FBI and its weaponization under your leadership. I am concerned that the president is using this book, your book, as a blueprint, as he has said. It's a blueprint for revenge. And I am concerned that your eagerness, a childlike giddiness to carry out the president's revenge tour, you've shown yourself to be unserious in your statements before you were sworn in and some after. You've shown yourself unfit to lead this important agency. I was an impeachment manager for President Trump's second impeachment. It was a sad, solemn duty. And so I wanted to ask you about that. Mr. Patel, as you and the president continue to weaponize and investigate his perceived enemies, as you follow this blueprint, when can I, a former impeachment manager, expect the FBI at my door?
Ma'am, you want to know who was targeted by a weaponized FBI? Me. You want to know how and why?
Well,
You want to know what I'm doing to fix it?
Let me move on.
Well, you should
Change
read the
topics.
book because there's no enemies
So-
list on that book.
So
There are
you-
people that violated their constitutional obligations and their duties to the American people.
That's good. You
And they
gave
were
them due
rightly
process.
called out.
I'm
And
changing
you should
topics.
give that book to every one of your constituents so they can read about it.
I won't be doing that.
That's their loss.
During your Senate confirmation hearings, you repeatedly denied having any involvement as a private citizen in the firing of FBI officials who engaged in the prosecution against January 6 insurrectionists, the violent rioters who beat and killed Capitol police officers, and whom you referred to as political prisoners. Since then, multiple whistleblowers have come forward, and we know that you likely committed perjury. At the same hearing, you claimed you were not familiar with Stu Peters, an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier, despite the fact that you appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 separate times. 8 times, and you claimed not to recall. Mr. Patel, my second question is, should we worry more about your memory or your veracity?
We should worry more about your lack of candor. You're accusing me of committing perjury.
Veracity?
Tell the American
didn't
people
know?
how I broke the law and committed a felony. Have the audacity to actually put the
all
facts
right, then
forward
the answer is
instead of
both.
lying for political banter so you can have a 20-second
answer
donation hit.
The answer is both. I believe that the
The
men and
answer is
women of
you're
the
failing, not me.
I reclaim my time.
Go ahead.
Mr. Patel, I believe that the members of the FBI, and I know many of them, many retired, 38,000 people, as you say, it's a little less than that now, deserve the very best, deserve extraordinary independence, deserve freedom from the fears of being investigated, the freedom of coming forward to make sure they're doing their job. And I'll end with this, that I think it's interesting that in your proposal today, you find yourself at a gulf of difference between you and the president. I wonder how you will resolve that. Will you go to the president and say, we need $11.2 billion, not what you cut out of here? You're asking for more than $1 billion than the president's request. Are you going to go to the president and straighten out that gulf?
I'll do what I've always done and represent the American people, defend this country, and make sure the Constitution is always upheld and the FBI is never weaponized. Maybe you should do the same.
So you agree with the president when he says he doesn't know if he should uphold his constitutional duty?
If you want to just keep putting words in my mouth, the TV cameras are outside.
Delivering a fierce congressional rebuke, Representative Madeleine Dean methodically challenged FBI Director Kash Patel's latest budget request, turning an ordinary oversight hearing into a harsh condemnation of what she described as the agency's fast-growing political weaponization under the Trump administration. Dean questioned Patel's ability to lead the nation's most powerful law enforcement bureau, pointing to the disturbing arrest of a sitting judge and the clear targeting of political opponents as proof that the agency had moved far away from its democratic purpose and professional independence. At the heart of her argument was Patel's own published book, which included a deeply disputed appendix that the president openly praised as a brilliant roadmap, even as Patel repeatedly insisted it was not a partisan enemies list. With careful and cutting precision, the Congresswoman urged her constituents to read the book not as serious policy, but as a frightening instruction manual for political revenge and a direct threat to constitutional duty. Pressing him without letting up, Dean confronted the director over major contradictions and alleged false testimony about his past connections and his exact role in the January 6 prosecutions, declaring that his failure to meet the responsibilities of his office had seriously damaged the FBI's funding, credibility, and basic place in American democracy.
Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, it's good to see you once again, and I know you're getting ready to head into the hearing, but your Democratic colleagues on the committee say the proposed cuts would be disastrous to law enforcement and public safety. Why? What's your thoughts?
Well, as you pointed out, more than $545 million worth of cuts to an agency that is our chief law enforcement agency for the United States, but of course it has such a role to play around the globe. At a time, and the testimony from Kash Patel will tell you that at a time of heightened risk and insecurity and threats to our nation at home and abroad, they want to cut. They also have a revenge list that they're playing through. I just keep thinking of the more than 38,000 members, folks who work for FBI. They're not interested in these games. They're not interested in the president's revenge tour. They're interested in doing their job and keeping Americans safe. So we're going to question Mr. Patel very strictly to say why in God's name are they seeking these cuts. And also, I believe we will reveal his unfitness for this position. It is a critically important position, and the serious cuts that they are talking about are irresponsible.
Well, let me ask you about some of the things I think you're going to hear, because they are things we have heard before from members of this administration, which is that it makes sense to get rid of DEI programs, or at least reduce them, because they have not made us safer. And too much money is spent on pet projects. What would you say to that?
Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. What are they afraid of with diversity, equity, inclusion? I can't figure that out. Businesses know it's a good idea to have a diverse workforce. If you're dealing with the entire globe and our safety, I think it matters that you have a diverse workforce that understands the intricacies of different places around the planet or different places around this country. These so-called pet projects. I want to go back to what you said about the weaponization. You saw in Donald Trump's 120-word statement about FBI and what he wants to see happen there with these deep cuts. He wants to get rid of the weaponization of the FBI. The deflection in this group is unbelievable. They are weaponizing, trying to weaponize through Kash Patel, who is wholly unfit for this job. They're trying to weaponize the FBI and keep it from being the independent law enforcement agency that it should be. It is really scary. It is grave. We'll poke holes in that nonsense.
Meantime, your Pennsylvania House colleague, Congressman Chris Deluzio, told NBC News he sees a new divide in the Democratic Party, with the real battle not between the center and the left, but he believes it's between fighters and wimps. His words. Do you agree with him? Is that the state of your party?
I didn't hear the second word. The haters and what?
Wimps. He said it's between the fighters and the wimps.
That reminds me of an old book that Governor Rendell wrote, and he called some people wimps. I don't agree with Chris. Chris is a talented guy and a fabulous representative, and thank God we have him in our Pennsylvania delegation. I see in the Democratic Party a people of strong values, the very values that uphold the Constitution of the United States, the very thing that the president this past weekend said he wasn't sure if he was required to uphold. So no, I'm not characterizing Democrats that way. We are people filled with values, and our values happen to be to reveal our diversity. What this administration is looking at, take a look at the greater budget. I am newly on the Appropriations Committee, delighted to finally have gotten there, having served on appropriations in the Pennsylvania House. Take a look at the priorities and the values of this president. He wants to cut NIH funding by 40%. Take us away from being a global leader on research, medical research for cures and treatments, gene therapies, and others. He wants to take away supplemental food. That hurts our seniors. This reveals their values, what they care about. They want to take away education funding and shutter the Department of Education. And all of this is in search of what? What they fail to talk about. Their end game, $4.5 trillion worth of increases, tax cuts to the billionaire class. Take a look at some of my Republican colleagues, and I'm calling out either the appalling silence of my Republican colleagues in the Pennsylvania delegation, or, as Representative Schmucker has recently said, the cuts aren't deep enough. Well, let's watch this and take a look at whose values reflect American values and reflect our duty, our oath to the Constitution.